But I think that when FutureEverything were thinking about the sort of curating it and some of the common themes that were running through it, they started particularly with the sort of idea of the sharing economy, or the so-called sharing economy, and how that epitomizes some of these positive and more negative things that we're seeing at the moment in our digital landscape. So I thought it would be interesting to sort of unpick that a bit further, particularly in terms of models of ownership, intellectual property, and things like that. And particularly Stef and Julia, you were talking about this sort of studio approach, collaborative approach. Can you say a bit more about any particular business models that you've seen, or other kinds of models that you think are working in regard to sharing successfully?
With my with the studio that I'm part of, we saw ourselves as kind of in this weird spot that no one had really done that much in London before. On one end, you have kind of people who are starting a business and they've got one idea and they've got their one thing they're going for. And the other end, you've got accelerator programs or co-working spaces. And we thought there would be something interesting if you mashed all those things together and found a sweet spot in the middle. And at that time, there was this idea of the startup studio, so that it wasn't something where you were just starting an investment fund, where you get entrepreneurs to come into your studio and then you invest a bit in them, you help them, and then off they go in the world. It was co-creation. We wanted to also be people who are coding and making. And so how do you balance that up about wanting to create things and also and to own them, but also to do many, many things? And I think the gravity pulls you to one extreme or the other. You end up being either a partial owner in someone else's idea or the full owner in one idea. And it's very hard to operate somewhere in the middle. And I think that studios will necessarily end up being something where you have transactional relationships with others. So you're doing projects for someone else and they're commissioning you, and the ownership of the idea is external to the core people who are working on it. And I've been there before, and it's quite frustrating working on other people's ideas all the time, and so wanted to swing back to owning every idea, and you can't. You have to kind of pick your point depending on where you are at any one time. So we wanted an environment that would allow us to be owners as well as creators, which is very challenging, and I'm not sure if we've answered those things. But the other models were quite interesting in that people are along that continuum in different ways.
I'm kind of at the beginning stages of exploring these models, and one of the ways that I think about New Ink is almost as like a research initiative in and of itself in sort of new models for creative entrepreneurship. It's interesting to see a lot of creatives in particular approaching their practice, be it an independent practice or a business, from a very mission-driven kind of principle value-informed mindset. And you're starting to see legal structures emerge, at least in the States, that complement that, things like benefit corporations, but they're not really common or commonly adopted, and there's still almost kind of a stigma against them to a certain extent. But I'm really interested in seeing that change, especially as the whole social entrepreneurship space grows. The other thing that we were talking about that I was also thinking about was I've been seeing a lot of artists appropriate the language of business, of marketing, of branding as a form of kind of institutional critique, whether it's groups like DIS or The Jogging or K-Hole that are like using, they're almost like masquerading as like advertising agencies or publishing companies or branding companies doing like trends forecasting reports as their artistic practice, and sometimes it's indecipherable almost whether it's meant to be facetious and critical or it's so convincing, like so that's something that's interesting, and they're also playing with the notions of the corporatized spaces within which their work exists in a way that I find to be really compelling. I don't know that it's like a business model to be followed necessarily, but it's an interesting discourse that's developing.
It's interesting, just to comment on what Julia said, because I think it might also be, you might also see this such efforts as an exploit of modern language, of the language that is so built into, especially the younger generation, let's say, that for them, in fact, that is the most native language for understanding something, and in fact, culturally, I personally could recognize it as indeed an exploit of or an attempt of delivering something at the very same level, same strength as commercial projects would. It's thinking about ownership and thinking about exploit. I think that's quite it's like
right. It's like studying those tactics and
kind
then
of a viral sort of way,
exactly.
which is I mean, smart. It's sort of a new art direction, almost, you could say.
Yeah, and there's some interesting models maybe in places you wouldn't, well, maybe you would expect, like blockchain and others are suggesting some alternative ways of doing things. Right, does anyone in the audience have any questions? You at the front.
I guess lots of you raised some really great questions around the issues of kind of technical literacy, ownership, passivity that we all have. And I wondered what, if anything, you're doing to enable and empower people or marginalised communities that haven't been up till now so involved in designing lots of the technology that we use today to collaborate and co-create, as you were saying. I mean, I think lots of the solutions that you suggested were really great. But yeah, I wonder what you're doing to get other people, other voices and other sections of the community that haven't been involved in that process now.
Great question. How do we make our innovation less unequal?
I've got a project.
Of course you have.
Yeah, I'm trying to be annoying. I have little kids, and I'm really inspired about encouraging children to be creators as well as consumers of technology, and I think you raised that point as well. Right. If you can spread that idea, just that one simple idea that the asymmetry of your BT internet connection is the absolute epitome of this problem, that we are kind of implying that the internet and technology is there to be consumed rather than to be created. Obviously you could counter that with lots of arguments, but generally that's what I believe. And with my children, I'm trying to encourage them to be of that mindset and to feel that they can create things just as easily as they can play a game on the iPad. And so just before Christmas, I won a little bit of seed funding to set up something called distributethefuture.com. And it's an inspirational box of technology with loads of really cool devices and kits and electronics that children can use in a classroom to begin to understand how they can create with these things, as well as watch CBeebies or whatever. And I'm working with my local school and the computing teacher in that school to prototype a box that includes lesson plans and instructions and how-to guides. And then the box will then hopefully do a Kickstarter or something like that, and then be able to ship that around the country and replicate it, so that schools who don't necessarily have the skills in the teaching department to be able to educate children in that way, or they can do to a certain degree but would like to do more, we'll be able to spread that out. It's an old William Gibson quote, "The future is here, it's just unevenly distributed." You've probably heard that said every single year at this festival, right? But I thought I'd name it after that principle. If we can distribute the future wherever it is, then that'd be great. I think you probably want to take a different line, but that's mine.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to add to what you just mentioned in the beginning, like a seamless iPad interface and hackable devices. I think the future is, in fact, more in that direction, like it is much, seamlessness is, you can say, is a dead end. Seamlessness of a device, seamlessness of particular technology, how well it ironed out it is not actually moving it further. What would move it further is if it was sort of breakable, if it was open, and if one could look under the hood of it, And in terms of hackability, in terms of devices such as the Raspberry Pi, I think those are much more pointed toward the future than an iPad or any seamlessly constructed device.
On that point, I'll just say one quickly, the criteria for things that go into my box, the 3 words are, is it educational, is it inspiring, is it hackable?
Right.
And so maybe there is something coming where we are talking about devices that you can get under the hood of and you can change. Sorry, I just said that.
No, I just would like to say that I think it should be both. Like, I think that something that's seamless is really inviting and really easy for people to start to engage with. And then hopefully building on that and encouraging you to break it and dig deeper and take it apart. Like, I think that it should be part of a 2-step process, and that's not something that's happening right now. I think things like the Raspberry Pi are amazing, but there's something about them that lacks a certain kind of sophistication that I would love to see that space grow into.
Well, I would agree on that.
Yeah.
Sure.
I just wanted to say that I think that when it comes to even distribution with creation and innovation, it's we're lucky that it's really more about mindset. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor. It's about the pursuit and passion again. Sorry for again being so dramatic with these words, but it's really about that. But I wanted to bring it back to ownership, because I think I disagree with all of you. I think that that ownership is a very retrograde word. I think now we live in time where the production speed and creation of something is speeding up so much that we cannot talk about patenting or ownership or rights for your idea because simply it's so easy to replicate, and this is the reality. And we can try and stop it with legislation, but I think that if you have a good idea and you create a great product, for example, like this, again, very dramatic words, but the most precious thing that you have is not the thing, it's the knowledge of this thing and why you made it and the intention and how to make it, which means that you can make a next iteration which is better, and someone would have to copy it again, but then you'll just have to reinvent it again, and it's a race of knowledge and innovation. It's not a race of securing the best idea and then ripping the royals from the idea through your life. You know, it's like music. It's not enough to write a good song. Maybe you have to sustain writing good songs which are more relevant to the time now and again. I'd like to ask if anyone...
Just as music, just to continue this allegory you just came up with, I think technology can be very inspiring, just as other forms of art. I think by having to create something, you don't necessarily need to own it, but as in culture, as in arts, you set it free, and you set it, you don't impose any limitations, as in open source development, for instance, and I think it is a great cultural effort, in fact, often not seen as such, but in my opinion it is. In my opinion, it is distribution of very valuable knowledge that is especially valuable today, how to create technology.
Surprised that I think that I'm in disagreement with you on that, actually, because I feel very similarly about the idea that you can come up with these early stage ideas, and that's what I've been doing all the time. There's no protection for these things. It's very easy for someone to look at your idea and replicate it in some way. The real only defensible thing that I realized in creating all these early stage products is, do I have the conviction and the team to follow through on this idea, and is there someone else who cares just as much as me about it? If they are, then they're a competitor, and that's the only thing. Like, you can create something, but unless you're going to follow through on it, it's just going to be an idea or an experiment or an artwork or an indicator. I've become quite grown up about this sort of thing nowadays. A few years back, when you were having a meeting with someone about an early stage idea, you'd usually start the discussion, and someone would kind of issue you with a document to sign with a non-disclosure clause saying don't tell anyone about it and so on. It seems to have really flipped around over the last few years, that people are really aware now that actually for things to succeed in the world, the ownership has to be kind of part owned by the community around you. You need a lot of community support to get anything off the ground. And if you're very lucky, then you can gather that around you yourself and kind of own an idea. And I think some of the big companies that you see around who are doing really well, and maybe the ones that we're talking about, they're kind of owning that cloud space, they do have just one big idea. Like Airbnb owns the idea of someone sleeping on your couch. Like there's no one else who's got that. And they've managed to have, through their force of will and their network, to own a concept. And that is defensible. They can't patent the idea of someone sleeping on a sofa, but who the hell else is going to start a company that's going to compete against them? No one.
Couchsurfing.com. Predates.
Right.
But when it gets too successful,
Neither here nor there.
it kind of flips, right? So if you see like the recent Pebble Watch on Kickstarter, the new version, and it got so much money immediately kind of thing, that's really shifted. Well, Kickstarter in itself has become quite a different model, it seems to me anyway, than how it was to begin with, when it seemed like a much smaller sort of community that was about, your local ideas, and now it seems more like a shopping mall kind of thing. I don't know if you think the same. Anyway, any more questions?
In your minds, how vital is it for creative technologists and hackers for their ideas to be financially sustainable, if at all? How much precedence should one be giving to whenever they form a new idea to think, how can I make this financially sustainable and how can I sustain myself, if at all?
It'd be wonderful if those efforts would actually be sustainable. Personally speaking, nevertheless, the requirement I have for projects I participate in is that they present a functional prototype or model of a technology they represent or illustrate. For me, it's critically important to have working stuff. That stuff not just concept, which is important, but I think today a functional prototype, functional example, a proof of concept, and maybe even pushed further onto the user base is very important. And whether it becomes commercially successful or not is a second part of the game, because something becoming commercially successful can also become very limiting or limited for the creators as well. Personally, because was Superglue to become a commercially successful project, I would drown in it and do nothing else, perhaps, which I wouldn't prefer.
Or you can hire someone to do it for you.
Right, that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that the skills that a hacker has necessarily matches the skills required to create a business. I don't think that when we are hacking and playing, we're thinking, all right, this will turn into a wonderful business. It's you're playing with an early idea and you're kind of sketching around. If you're lucky enough and you've managed to find an environment where that can be your main job, or that's what you enjoy doing, and you manage to do that in your weekday, then that's pretty amazing. So it should necessarily then be something that gives you an income. Otherwise, how are you doing that? But I think putting pressure on yourself in your spare time to work up little ideas and start thinking too early that they have to be businesses, I think that can kind of spoil things a little bit. And some of the best things I've made, things I've enjoyed the most, and the ones that tell a story are the ones that are completely financially unviable. How am I going to make data necklaces into a business? I'm not going to become a jeweler, but I enjoyed doing that and I enjoyed talking about that. There's something emerging from the west coast of America at the moment about this idea of the basic living wage. There's a lot of conversation about how, as we progress, a lot of the jobs that people are doing could quite easily be replaced by cloud systems or by robotics in the physical world. Business processes becoming more efficient necessarily means that fewer people are employed in those traditional roles. What does that do to us? We could end up with quite a polarized society where you people who are the creative technologist types become kind of detached from the rest of the population in terms of the earning potential. So I definitely think it's worth spending some attention on this issue. And the basic living wage is an idea that that perhaps there should just be a basic that everybody has that enables people to, if they want to, work on some experimental ideas and as a hacker, then they are able to do that. The society actually has a function that enables that to occur, to enable new businesses to come, new products to come out. It's a fascinating idea, and that's an oversimplification of the whole thing, but there's definitely something going on where people are talking about that sustainability and ownership of their own process around being a maker-hacker type.
It's really interesting. We're seeing similar things in London at the moment, where there is supposedly a living wage, but 25% of people do not make that. At the same time, there are, Tech City, etc., is changing the face of what was once.
Well, the wages involved are completely detached from
reality.
Yeah, it's polar. You see this particularly in culture. So artists will expect a certain day rate for their work, whereas a technologist working with that artist will expect a much higher rate, and that's a real tension.
We had this some decade ago. Perhaps cultural funding was supposed to fulfill that niche, was supposed to kind of hold that role, at least in those several countries I lived in at the time, like the Netherlands. Cultural funding was one of these financial securities for artists who could actually live based on that average dotation that they would have. But, well, we all know that didn't work so well, but I don't know, for not having a job for the last 20 years, I'm sympathize a lot to that idea, though I don't know how would it actually work.
Okay, thank you so much for bringing your passion and imagination and ideas to this topic of ownership and exposing some of the tensions that I think are at the heart of it that we're still uncovering. I'm going to move us on now to the last speaker of the day, if that's okay. So you can stay there if you want, or go back. Please give them a big round of applause.